Hey everybody, and welcome to the latest edition of Criterion Watch. And today our movie is going to be a classic from Stanley Kubrick, Dr. Strangelove, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love to Live the Bomb. Probably the greatest black comedy of all time. Now this is the movie that I absolutely adored for a long time, so it's pretty familiar to me. You said you saw it before, right?
I seen Pizza when I was a teenager, but it was, I mean, all these type of things, seeing that my dad watched it all years ago, seeing it now as an adult, it's actually a lot better.
And
different.
Lenore, this was your first.
I had seen the clip of the guy riding the bomb at the end, but that was all I'd ever seen.
Okay. Well, I guess first things first, I guess I'll introduce myself. My name is Presenza, known as the Moo Cow, and with us today are...
Lenore?
And
Joe.
All right. So those are our introductions, and so Dr. Strangelove, directed and produced and co-written by Stanley Kubrick, who's my personal favorite director of all times. And as I was telling these guys, initially, this was a movie that was built on a film that was produced, I think, or a book that was written in 1958 called Red Alert. And initially, Stanley Kubrick wanted to make this as a straight-up drama about what might happen if the wrong person was able to start a nuclear war. And as the writing of the script went on, it became apparent that it was such an appalling idea that there was absolutely no way that he could shoot this as a straight-up drama. It would be far too depressing and nobody would want to come see it. So instead, he had the brilliant idea to turn it into a comedy, or at least a black comedy. And he got the writer Terry Southern to come on and help him with this. And the pair of them together just managed to put together this fantastic film that is just deeply blackly humorous, and you are just laughing at things that you have no business laughing at, because there's no way in heck that such an event should be funny at all, and yet it's ridiculously hysterical as well. So there's a lot of really cool stuff that I want to bring up about this film. First I want to get your impressions. Go ahead first, Joe.
Well, seeing it as a kid, and what I remember of it as a kid, I just remembered, and it's really not for kids, obviously, just seeing them talking and arguing just didn't really appeal to me at that time. But seeing it as an adult and what I've lived through and what I've seen and what I'm experiencing in today's world, which I'm sure we'll get to later to some degree, seeing it now, it's like it's a totally different thing, and I'm practically in awe of this movie.
I know, it's so good. And then, yeah, the sad thing is, you know, it's pretty applicable to today. So Lenore, what are your thoughts on the film, first off?
It was horrifying, but it was funny, but it was horrifying.
Right. What horrified you?
Just the idea, in general, of
Sure.
somebody being able to cause that many problems. And it all started with one person.
Right, one paranoid, delusional person. Well, unfortunately, back in the 60s, this could very well have happened. I think it was in the New Yorker, there was a piece written that basically, in 2013 I think it was, that basically said everything in Dr. Strangelove was true and could have happened because of the way things were set up.
Didn't they have the warning at the beginning that it's the official stance of the Air Force?
Yes, they did. Yeah, he got a lot of flack for this film because they didn't want anybody to know that. They didn't want to be seen as being, you know, not being safe. But the fact is, in the 60s, especially at the height of the Cold War, the idea was that it was better for the military to be able to quickly, you know, respond to a nuclear war situation than it was to be safe. You know?
And it just the paranoia that with the Cold War, I mean that set everything into a different. Obviously, seeing this movie 50-some years ago when it first came out, I'd be interested to read some more background on how it was received then.
Sure.
And because I mean, seeing it through those eyes versus seeing it like I said, me seeing it as a child versus seeing it as an adult, it's two different pieces. But also that being the world then, with very similarities now, with that this could relate to.
Absolutely. And I know you really enjoyed the whole fluoridation of water conspiracy thing. Talk to us a little bit about that.
So that's actually a real conspiracy theory, and I can't believe it started with this film. There's actually people who think there's fluoride in the water poisoning people, and now they refuse to drink water. I've literally met people who refuse to drink water.
Yeah, well, I
They
can't.
brag about it.
I can't say definitively that this film started it, but certainly it was around at this time. And you're right, there are people who do believe in this sort of thing, and the idea that such a person could actually be somebody who could start a war in this fashion is upsetting to say the least. You know?
Yeah. Wait. When was this film made?
This was 1962?
Mid-
1964.
Yeah.
Wait.
1964.
You mean the whole nuts online crazy conspiracy theories that people inexplicably believe in? That happened before the internet?
Oh sure, oh sure. A lot of this stuff is grounded in post-World War II communist Red Scare and conspiracies.
So were there actually like flat earthers and stuff at the time too?
Oh, I'm sure there were.
Sure. Yeah.
Sure.
Uh,
So, you know, whether Stanley Kubrick and Terry Southern did this on purpose or not, they tapped into what is a part of the American subconscious, which is this vein of conspiracy theories and paranoia and xenophobia that's just part of our national character, and sort of exposes it for, you know, the ugly truth that it is. And that's one of the brilliant things about this film. It's just amazing.
it's just one event leads on top of another, on top of another, on top of another in this. Because, like we were talking about, is like there's the paranoia with the conspiracy. There's the whole atmosphere of the world at the time. But then it's just misunderstanding after misunderstanding. And then there's the macho aspect of the guys and stuff like that. And ultimately leads to how it all plays out at the very end. But it's just there's the sexual tensions that I saw in this. So it was just like, wow.
Right, and that's really where the black humor comes in, and the irony of the whole situation, because it's not because the crazy general succeeded in doing it. It's just that the whole thing happens because of failure after failure after failure after failure, and everybody manages to overcome that failure, which in normal circumstances
Would be good.
Would be good.
But that absurdity plays well with the whole
It was
idea of
great.
what they were trying to do with some of the names they even had for some of
I
the
know the
people.
names are fabulous.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about the characters. So Peter Sellers gives one of the greatest performances you will ever see in a film.
Performances. Yeah.
Yeah, he plays 3 roles. He plays, let's see, he plays
He plays the British
the
officer.
British officer,
who's
right.
brought in.
who's very, very staid and stiff upper lip, and is trying his best to get the code from the crazy Jack the Ripper.
Yeah.
You know. Then he is playing the president, Muffle Merkin, something like that, I forget, and who's also, I guess he's supposed to be sort of a caricature of Adlai Stevenson, sort of, very sort of liberal, but also not very manly in the eyes of some people. And then finally he plays Dr. Strangelove himself, this wonderful, probably the greatest sort of post-World War II Nazi scientist person. And every performance of that trope, that character type, owes a huge debt of thanks to Peter Sellers and his role there, because it's just magnificent. It really is great. So then we have Sterling Hayden, who's playing the Jack Ripper, the guy who starts all this because of his crazy conspiracy theories. And let's see, we have George C. Scott, and probably my favorite performance of him as Colonel Buck Turgis, Bucky, who is just, he's just such like your typical frat boy football player, gung-ho, pro-military colonel, who's trying to find the bright side of killing 20 million people. Well, at least it's not 150 million people. It's just so funny. In a awful kind of way.
Well, and the way he got introduced with his secretary.
Yes.
That was at 3 in the morning, and she's suntanning or something like that. But then they answer the phone, and she's being all professional with it. And
Right.
all that.
It's adorable.
Yeah.
She's like, "Oh, we're going over notes." Yeah.
Oh, and then she calls into the middle of the circle when they're having the discussion in the Pentagon or
Right.
whatever, and some of that back and forth that's going on there. Well, there's some serious conversations going on. He's sort of trying to massage this apparently an affair or whatever's going on there.
I'm gonna make you Mrs. Bucky Turgison.
Yeah.
It's so funny.
Something with his name too. I don't know if it's 100% true, but it another movie, the comedy years later, Back to School with Rodney Dangerfield.
Oh yeah.
Turgison was Sam Kinnison's character's, the professor's name, and he was sort of a on the edge, like paranoid type of got in the big
Oh
argument.
yeah, I didn't notice that.
I'm just wondering if the name sounds very familiar. So I mean, it could just be a coincidence, or I'm sure there's probably some deeper level to that. But
Oh yeah, I mean this movie is well loved, especially by other directors and writers in Hollywood. So yeah, that's pretty awesome. Then we've got Keenan Wynn, who plays the colonel who breaks in and insists to Mandrake. That's Peter Sellers' British character. That if he ends up shooting the lock off the Coca-Cola machine, he's going to have to talk with the Coca-Cola company. Damn it!
Yeah, the world destruction means nothing. You
Sure.
have to deal with the Coca-Cola company, which
Because he's following his orders, and that's that.
and then the other one.
Oh,
Slim.
and then we got Zero Mostel,
Yeah.
who is a fabulous actor, who's playing the Russian diplomat who has to talk to Dmitry Kissoff, Premier Kissoff, one of the great
That's
names.
great name, yeah.
Who's great, and he, of course, is immediately the enemy of George C. Scott, and they end up fighting, and they have that wonderful line, "Gentlemen, you can't fight in here, this is the war room." It's hysterical. Everybody gives a fabulous
Slim Pickens,
performance.
too.
Slim Pickens, I think that's his first role.
Yeah, the only thing I really remember him, and I'm sure he's done a lot of other stuff, was Blazing Saddles, but
Right. He's been in a ton of stuff.
Yeah.
He was actually, I believe he was he started off as a rodeo clown. And yeah, he was a cowboy, and he ended up doing stunts and stuff like that. And
that plays well with this character.
Right.
With this
So
cowboy mentality.
it's funny because I believe what I remember reading is that Peter Sellers was actually supposed to play that role too. He was supposed to have the fourth
really?
role, but he injured his ankle. And when he tried to get into the cockpit of the plane that they used, he injured it again. And so the backers of the film basically said, okay, you can't get him anywhere near the cockpit. He's going to have to get to someone else.
That would have made sense for Sellers to play that character originally, because
Right.
then it would have been every spot in the film would have had him in some
Right.
context.
And because the writer Terry Southern is from Texas, the decision was made to go with a character who was more of a Texan. And so Slim Pickens is Texan
yeah.
beyond belief, and he's got his little cowboy hat, and he says those wonderful lines. He's like, "I'm gonna get these bottom doors open if it hair lips every person on Bear Creek." It's just like, okay.
It seems like there was a lot of ad-libbing that
Yeah,
happened here.
there's-
And doesn't that seem really in contrast to what
Kubrick normally does.
Yeah, 'cause he's
Yeah.
very meticulous
Well,
in every little detail.
I don't believe he had Slim Pickens do the ad-libbing, but Peter Sellers,
Yeah.
he gave wide berth. And a lot of the scenes where Peter Sellers is doing his Dr. Strangelove, you can see people in the background cracking up. Like the first part where his arm's going up like this, Zero Mostel is just about losing it. It's so funny. Strangely enough, the original ending ended with a pie fight.
What?
Yes. The way it
do
was
tell.
originally shot, the whole thing ends with them all throwing pies at each other. And when Kubrick finally looked at it, he's like, okay, that was over the top. Or get rid of the damn pies. It's just ridiculous. But apparently there is footage someplace. I would love to see it. I've never seen it, but yeah, pie fight.
Wow. That'd be interesting, but I mean, I guess semi-world destruction or whatever.
Right. Well, it's. I can understand why they might want to put it in, but it's so wise to take it out because you don't want to drift from, a black comedy into, or even a farce even into cartoon. And Pie Fight would have been
Yeah, that would have been
Three Stooges
yes,
cartoon,
Stooges,
yeah. And it would have undermined the whole part because, what makes the comedy so biting in this is the reality and the believability that this could happen. And to sort of underline that a little bit, let me tell you about Kubrick and why he's such a genius. The whole concept of a big board in a pentagon, that originates in this film.
Oh, really?
It didn't exist. Nobody knew about that. And from this movie onward, now we have this idea, but Kubrick created it. And he had no idea. He wasn't allowed into the Pentagon, so he had to talk to people about stuff. And he said, you know, is this something that could happen? And they said, you know, it seemed feasible, but for all they knew, it wasn't something that actually existed. Never saw it in the movie before. You know, same thing with the cockpit of the planes. You know, it was a secret to you know, to divulge that kind of information at the time. So I think, if anything, I don't even think he even got a look at a real cockpit. But he did talk with a number of retired military folks who was able to talk the set designer. Set designer, I forget his name. He's really, really good. He's a guy who worked in Dr. No and worked on a whole bunch of other big Hollywood films and was like a really good professional set designer. He came up with all those cockpits, all those gadgets, all those dials and knobs and switches. Nobody knew what that shit was.
And not only when they said something like switch to this or whatever, I like the zoom ins.
Right. All the fail safes, all the knobs, and you know, and that's what he said. He said, you know, in these planes there are redundancies on top of redundancies on top of redundancies on top of redundancies. These planes don't fly 4 engines, you know, because they have to. They do it as a backup. And you know, you see when the plane gets damaged by the missile, they're down to 1 engine, but it can still fly and go on its missions. The same thing with every system has multiple backups, and that's how they're designed. Yes, I know, that's wonderful.
Is that like the book that they referenced in there?
Yes.
Yeah, one has the credits in it. It looks
What's
like
the Holy Bible in the
Russian phrase.
Russian phrases.
It's so adorable.
Like the production designer was Ken Adam.
Nice.
Well, I guess
nice.
that's kind of interesting what
did a
all's
great
in the
job.
packet. I mean, it sounds like.
Oh yeah. I was going to get to that.
I'm sorry.
That's all right. But yeah, so that's typical of what Stanley Kubrick does. Stanley Kubrick, if he cannot get reality, he will make it, and he will make it the most realistic reality that he can make. So, yeah, people, and if you look at period movies, you know, you don't see anything like that cockpit on any plane. In fact, usually you're looking straight at the plane. I'm thinking like Plan 9 from Outer Space, you know, where the guys are sitting behind the wheels and you see the chair, and that's all you see. You don't see any instruments. You don't see anything like that because nobody knew. But in this film, they had to make it all up, and tell me that didn't look realistic.
Well, I mean,
in every possible way.
I'm not used to seeing that sort of environment. Thinking 55 years ago or whatever, that's pretty.
Oh yeah.
It seems pretty meticulously
so
intact.
based on the information that they got from military advisors and from other people that he talked to, that's how they created that extremely realistic cockpit for this B-52. And I mean, I was blown away when I heard it. But this is typical. I mean, you look at Kubrick's 2001: A Space Odyssey, which I hope you've seen. If you haven't, we have to show you that. Previous to that film,
That's your next film.
you know, any film that had outer space or had, you know, nobody, there was no such thing as gravity. You never had to worry about that. Nobody floated around. Everybody just talked and walked like normal. They smoked, you know, they did all kinds of normal shit like you might do in an office. And that's not how it works. It was the first film to show people, you know, in zero gravity walking like, you know, upside down and, you know, in special boots, not smoking, not breathing normal air, you know, having spacesuits, that you know. And again, Kubrick had never done that before, so he talked to experts and managed to get the most realistic designs and realistic things that he could from NASA. I mean, this is just the way he is. And you're right, he is famous for meticulous attention to detail. And so that's just one of the big reasons why I love this film and why I love Stanley Kubrick in general. So we talked about some of the actors. I mean,
James Earl Jones.
James Earl Jones. This is one of his early roles, if not his first role. He's quite good in that. Poor guy, his system gets blown out, and he's got to go back and say, it's not working. And he had the famous, you know, riding the rocket ship down, riding the rocket down. There you go.
On the back too. Ride 'em cowboy.
Ride 'em cowboy. Yeah, it's just this wonderful
That's
thing.
top secret with all sorts of information
Yes.
in there.
Yeah, I was going to show this later, but I may as well talk about this. Is the Criterion version, which is fabulous. It's Blu-ray. It comes with all kinds of great stuff inside. There's the disc, and it comes with this wonderful top secret
You have to have the right
envelope.
code.
Got to have the right code in order to open it. To be opened only when the go code is received. And when you open it, whoa! And you've got this wonderful top secret file in very 1960s kind of script. Wish my fingers would work here. Here we go. Plan R, so top secret R.
Is that the Playboy magazine?
Yeah, it's like
or whatever?
exactly, and it's got the same stuff. Have you ever seen a commie drink a glass of water? That's so hysterical, and it's got all kinds of wonderful information on here.
Oh,
Yeehaw.
yeah.
There's an article on Terry Southern, just all kinds of stuff. And then, of course, the piece de resistance, the little itty-bitty Bible and Russian phrase book that's in the survival gear, which I thought was hysterical. We all laughed at that.
Oh, this is good stuff.
So, yeah, it's definitely, if you love this movie, and you should, this is a great film. It comes with all these great little extras that you have to check out. So much fun. So it's become one of my favorite films for just a whole number of reasons. And, the cinematography was fabulous. I really liked his use of the handheld camera during the fight scenes. It kind of made you, put you right there in the middle of it. Again, sort of, it's a comedy, it's funny, but at the same time, it's also very realistic. I mean, you're feeling like you're right there.
Yeah, but when they were shooting at the base with the peace sign, whatever, that seemed. I mean, that seemed like a.
Oh, I know. Peace is our profession while they're firing and shooting each other. That's so Kubrick.
So even though it looked so real with the fighting, having that sort of as a backdrop, sort of
Now,
played into the whole idea.
My only nitpick for any of the scenes in this film is at the point where Ripper is firing the machine gun. He's making poor Mandrake feed him the bell, and he's holding it, but he's holding it on the barrel, which, if you notice, the barrel's full of holes because that's where the hot gas is coming out of. You would not want to hold your hand there; you would get it burned. So, really, it's not the way you would hold a machine gun, but it's okay.
So, I actually had a question about that.
Sure.
So when Mandrake said his leg was injured, was he lying or was
Oh,
it
yeah.
actually injured?
No, he was trying to get out of doing that.
Okay.
That's one of my favorite ones. It's like, the string in my leg is bad. It's like, the what? The string. It's gone. Shut away. Because he's trying to come up with any excuse not to help this crazy person do what he's doing. It was just very funny.
If you're locked in a room with a crazy person, you should probably help them before they decide to kill you.
Exactly. So the humor part was very good. There was a lot of physical humor, but a lot of very intellectual humor as well. What did you guys think of the music? The music was very important.
We all thought it sounded familiar. It was Johnny King's Marching Home?
Right.
That one sequence, it reminded me of a scene. I don't know if it's actually the same one, but from Die Hard with a Vengeance, when they introduced Jeremy Irons' character, it seemed very similar in tow to what. So they might have tapped that in obviously Die Hard 30 years later, but.
Another German character, huh?
Yeah. So I guess there you go. There probably is something to that, but just in general, I mean, it was spot on with the music.
Oh yeah, fabulous.
Yeah, it was very tongue-in-cheek, very
And then
cowboy-esque at times. The western.
The ironic use of "We'll meet again" at the end when the Doomsday Machine is going off and everything's being destroyed, and Dr. Strangelove is talking about going into the mine shafts with all the men and having 10 women per men, and they're all suddenly going, oh yeah, okay, maybe this isn't so bad after all.
Yeah, so that's sort of a comment, I guess, on the male way of
Right,
looking at things.
right.
In the reality that people like that could be in charge of or may be in charge of our country and stuff like that, and how it could sometimes logic is not key when you have what's going on in one person's mind, how it could react to.
That's the worst part is all of these different moving parts, everybody, with the exception of Ripper, was acting according to consistent internal logic.
Yes.
Yeah, so it's just.
Even then, you could argue that Ripper was acting according to internal logic. It was just very flawed internal
Extremely
logic.
flawed,
It
right.
just continuously descends into further madness.
Right.
Because
So
nobody can communicate because the radios and everything are out.
So you are our resident scientist for Indie Film Cafe. was there anything about the science or anything behind any of that that you find interesting? Or was it on form? Was it not on form?
The only thing I found unusual was the 92-year half-life.
Right, of that particular element. I didn't know if that was a real element or not.
I didn't hear what they were saying, but it didn't sound like it.
Did they say they'd be back in 100 years or something?
Something like that, right.
Or close to a century later.
Which is still bad, but it's definitely not the worst half-life in existence.
Oh,
No,
for nuclear weapons?
I don't know, I don't work with nuclear weapons.
No. But say we could get an extremely bad half-life, what would they use?
Well, a lot of things have really long half-lives. I think, is it okay if I use my phone to look it up?
Oh,
I
sure.
think plutonium has a high one.
You don't have to know everything.
Still, it'd be only about halfway there right now. Because
Right.
they had to go 100 years and be about 50 years later now, so they still only be halfway there.
Well, I mean, there's something too. I mean, do you think humans, 100,000 humans, could survive in a deep cave for 100 years?
No.
Yeah, I didn't think so either, even with the food and water.
Yeah, even they said they had ways of doing plant life and all the stuff necessary to be alive.
Yeah, plutonium has a half-life of 24,100 years.
Yeah, there you go, plutonium. Eek. Let's hope nobody uses plutonium in a device ever. But there's also a lot of politics at the time that's interesting because you hear them talking about the gaps, and that was like a big deal in the 60s was, you know, you had the space gap, and then there was the quote-unquote missile gap, which turned out to be bullshit. It's just another scare tactic to drive policy in a certain way for certain people. And then they talked about the peace gap because there were a lot of people who wanted peace. And then they're talking about the doomsday device gap, and then finally the mine shaft gap. And it's just funny how their thinking continuously evolves to come up with these fake conflicts.
Yeah, they're still thinking along national lines for a global disaster.
Right, right. I mean, if it turns out that you need penguins to shield you from the radiation, they'd be talking about a penguin gap. You know, it's just ridiculous. But that's thinking of the time, you know. And there are some very, very interesting parallels between the world that this movie is set in and when it was originally shown and today. I mean, it still only takes the wrong person in the wrong position of authority to start a catastrophic event that cannot be stopped, and who the heck knows what's going to happen. And then the other thing is, people today don't really realize how close this country came to an actual nuclear war at the height of the Red Scare in the 60s. I mean, literally, from what I've read, it was this close, and it came to a phone call to the Soviets, and there was like a Soviet officer of some kind who basically blinked and called off an attack, and we were that close. Not to say nothing of you know, the Cuban Missile Crisis. So not fun times. You know, I mean, I don't know whether you experienced this as a kid, but I was that generation just after doing the stop, drop, and roll under your desks as if that was going to save you for a nuclear attack. I might have done that as a very, very tiny kid. But I don't remember it. Did you have that?
I remember going under I think mine was more like hurricane driven, or when I grew up in Florida and stuff like that.
It was like tornado and hurricane and earthquake drills, not
Right.
radiation.
Right. Yeah, I think I was sort of in that first group that they decided that wasn't really going to happen. So why scare the poor kids? Because I grew up in the 70s. So yeah, it's a heady topic and very interesting. And I like to watch this film every few years because A, it's a magnificent masterpiece, but also because it makes you think. And I love turning new people on to this film who've never seen it, because it's an excellent film and it gives you a little window into how people thought, and interesting how it connects with today. Don't you think?
Yeah. So something I noticed with Dr. Strangelove is, well, I think that whatever was going on with his hands is something that actually exists. It's just really rare.
Really?
I think it's called alien hand syndrome.
I don't know. I've never heard this before.
I don't know, like, how common it is. It might have actually come about because of this movie. Like how sometimes new mental illnesses come about, like, after you're exposed to knowledge of them.
But he had that inner Nazi thing trying
Oh,
to break
yeah,
out too,
yeah,
I
that
guess,
was-
a little bit.
that
so
was
to
awesome.
tie
But
it in with-
I do know that there are those who receive, new arms, new hands, new legs, that they talk about phantom pain, phantom feelings, and that there are times when they feel that the new piece is alien, an alien piece of them.
Oh, yeah. I guess it could be related to that too, but I think alien hand is specifically when you can't control the movements of one of your limbs.
Hmm.
And I don't think it's ever quite that extreme in the movie, but it does sometimes
So kind of like a weird version of restless leg syndrome?
Yeah.
Okay, interesting.
happen. But what I noticed is Dr. Strangelove literally did not know what his left hand literally did not know what the right hand was doing.
Oh, I know. It was great. I mean, you saw he would like grab the wheel and try to move the wheelchair, and he was like fighting against it, and
But
he ends up biting it.
I think that's a really good point, though, of the context of the whole film. Really, when you say the left hand
Right.
didn't know what the right hand was doing, because
Right.
because it wasn't just him that it was with him as well. But each situation, it was just like one thing was pushing against the other, and it caused gridlock ultimately.
Mhm.
Whether it good intentions or not, it was just
Because
constant gridlock.
in the end, nobody really knew the whole situation.
Right.
And
And
it all started with
tragic
Trevor.
things happen because of that, and it all starts from that one person. That's all it takes.
Yeah, well,
Which really begs the question of what made him decide that particular night to do all this? What
Well,
set him off?
I don't know. I guess because they did say the planes were at their failsafe, and that was the time to do it if he was going to do it. I guess. So I guess he could no longer, like he says in his famous speech, he could no longer stand by and allow all this quote unquote communist stuff to infiltrate and destroy the country. So yeah, just a nutbag.
So I saw that this didn't. It was nominated for some awards. Like
Oh, yeah.
For some U.S. Oscars, but I don't think it won any. But it was nominated
Should've.
a couple of the big ones. I'm not sure what won that year, but it obviously something else that did. It must be absolutely great, or just politics.
Well, at the time, I think there were a lot of people when this came out who really weren't sure how to react to this
a little
film.
bit ahead of its time.
Oh yeah, it was definitely ahead of its time. There's obvious comedy to it, but the underlying sort of dark idea behind it almost makes it so that if you are laughing, you're laughing nervously. I can only imagine what it would have been in 1964 to see this because, again, height of the Red Scare. It's funny, but at the same time, it could really, really, really happen, and that's not funny.
Yeah, because there was that. It was still only 25 years after
Right.
after World War II. So
I believe there was a similar film that came out in 1965 by Sidney Lumet. I don't remember the name of it. That was a very similar plot without the black humor, and it also kind of got lambasted by the military, and a lot of people didn't like it. Realistic, it could never happen.